This is Kurt with Madison ModPo. Today we are going to talk about Riprap by Gary Snyder. But let me do the introductions. To my right, far right, is Jim, and then Lou. And Lou is the one who's going to lead us in discussion on Riprap.
Okay. Well, this is by Gary Snyder, and the first thing I'm going to do is just read it. Riprap. Lay down these words before your mind like rocks placed solid by hands in choice of place, set before the body of the mind in space and time, solidity of bark, of leaf, of wall, riprap of things, cobble of Milky Way, straying planets. These poems, people, lost ponies with dragging saddles, and rocky, sure-foot trails. The world's like an endless four-dimensional game of Go. Ants and pebbles in the thin loam, each rock a word, a creek-washed stone, granite ingrained with the torment of fire and weight, crystal and sediment linked hot, all change in thoughts as well as things. And this is a poem by Gary Snyder, who is, I won't say much more about, very interesting and actually wonderful man, an anthropologist, a hiker, poet, amazing guy, but I won't say much more about him. The poetics of this poem are really, really interesting. If you look at it at first, it's kind of a strange way that the words are laid out, but then if you think about, he spent a good deal of his, or significant more of his life in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and he made a living working there, building trails, fixing bridges, and what I did, and we won't do it here, it'd be fun to do, is to start walking and read this poem. And you'll find that it's iambic, it has a rhythm, but the lines are so different in length. And here's 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet, 8 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet. So if you walk and read this, you'll find that this is a word representation of a hike. It actually is, and each line of this is like a series of steps along a trail. So that's number one. Number two, it has a very nice rhyme scheme to it, or at least there's a lot of nice rhymes: place, space, before and before, mind and mind, rocky, repetition of words that are rhymes as well as real rhymes. So being a traditionalist, I think poems should rhyme.
Well, and then there's the alliteration, game of Go,
Lots of
granite.
alliteration. Yeah.
Wait, hot thought.
Yeah. So it has a lot of the elements that a traditionalist like I appreciate. And somebody who sits down and wants to produce an idea with words and make the words also do something. This is really a metaphor poem about metaphors. It's entirely built of metaphors. There's just almost every line is a metaphor for words, for the concept of words. Words being placed, actually physically placed by your hand in a place. Words being placed in your mind in space and time. I've been reading about space and time, and how time and space and matter are all one thing. And so this is a kind of a metaphor for that. And then there are simple things, bark and leaves. So he actually, I put this out someplace, and there is archaeology, there is astronomy, there is sociology, there's all of those different aspects of knowledge incorporated into this poem.
Geology.
And yeah, geology. I should have said that primarily. Geology. The end of the poem is nothing but a restatement of how a poet deals with words as time has dealt with matter in our world. Sand and water and lava have formed beautiful, beautiful things, and they were the result of heat and pressure. And so when you write a poem, you using words, and a good poem is not a simple thing, but is formed by mental pressure and by emotional heat, and out comes something entirely different than the substances that it was made of. So that's kind of the way I looked at this poem. Now, the game of Go was really fascinating. Have you played Go? You
No.
must have played. You
Yeah,
haven't played
no.
Go.
I
Oh
have
my
played Go.
goodness.
I've
Have you
played Go, and it's, I'm a chess player, but I have to recognize that Go is even, is a harder game. They first got computers to be able to beat persons, but it took a long time before a computer was, before they had the software and the programming to get a computer to actually beat a Go champion.
Right.
And that's just happened in the last year or two.
Due to the complexity.
Due to the complexity, I found one line, if I could share this.
Sure.
Go is the most complex of all games. There are many possible Go games, 10 followed by more than 300 zeros. There are many possible Go games than there are subatomic particles in the known universe.
Go is the oldest board game in existence and has been traced back to at least 3,000 years. So our ancestors 3,000 years ago were playing Go.
I believe it.
It's also immensely simple. All you need are some rocks, pretty rocks if you can get them, but they don't need to be pretty. And you need a board that's divided somehow into a grid.
And this is
And there's a picture of one.
yeah, and the individual pieces are called stones,
Stones.
which is just so perfect for a
Right.
poem about riprap.
Well, and something that's 3,000 years old. So they were stones. They've been stones for centuries and centuries. That's what's been used to play that game.
Yeah.
But there's a little added feature here, and that is this is really a two-dimensional game. You're playing on a flat surface,
Yeah.
and you move things in one
On that
dimension,
surface.
actually. He mentions here a four-dimensional game of Go. If you think yours is complicated,
Right.
how in the world would you play even a three-dimensional? If you made that into a cube, and you could do that now, at least with a computer, and then you tried to make your moves in three-dimensional space, it would add a huge more complexity.
Then you add time to it. to
But
make
then you
fourth
add
dimensional.
Time is the fourth dimension.
And time is the fourth dimension.
And I think this poem is a brilliant statement of, and he was aware of Buddhism, of impermanence,
Mm-hmm.
which in the first part you're talking about, you lay down rocks, you lay down words, you create something, you form a space, and there it is. But anybody who's worked on trails knows that you're going to have to go back and repair them over time. And that's the last part of it, all change in thoughts as well as things.
What struck me about that, and I think it's, you've spoken of this already, Jim, was how he sees within that granite the impermanence of it.
Yes,
And where it came from, the torment of fire
that's right.
and weight,
Pressure.
crystal and sediment linked hot, and then the keep all change.
Yes,
And then recognizing change as embedded in the granite, change in our thoughts, as well as things.
That's right.
Granite, above all, started out as a very unsubstantial thing. It was the sand in the bottom of
The center,
ancient
yeah.
lakes that you could scoop up by the handful, and it becomes an extremely hard rock.
Yeah.
Something else that came to my mind when I thought about the word riprap and why this was titled that. Every sort of riprap, and there are a variety of them. As I talked with Jim. I lived on and near the Delta, and I had a boat. And the California Delta is just a big waterway with islands that are divided from the water by riprap. And that riprap is usually concrete blocks. It can be asphalt slabs. It can be big stones. It can be boulders. But what that does is delineate the land, dry land, which is now farmed and beautifully farmed, and the water, which is running out to the ocean. It's two big rivers, the Tulare River and three rivers, the American River and the Sacramento River, all join up. And riprap is what organizes this so that humans can use it. Other kinds of riprap do the same thing. If you're in the Sierra Mountains on a trail, the riprap delineates the trail from the meadows, from the sides of creeks, from wherever that trail goes. It's very often, most often, delineated by some form, by stones, by logs laid out, by some form of human activity which then shows you the path. And that's what this poem does. It takes words and it forms them and it makes a path for the poem. That's what he's done. He's taken words as riprap and he has made a poem out of those words. So what a clever poem. What a immensely interesting poem in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah, he wrote this, he was still quite young, and he was working on the trails during this. He said he wrote riprap, he'd already given up poetry, but then he got back in poetry when he found himself writing poetry during his experiences here. He'd been influenced already by by studying classical Chinese poets. And he said, I'm just recently come to realize that the rhythms of my poems follow the rhythm of physical work I'm doing in a life I'm leading at any given time. Riprap is really a class of poems I wrote under the influence of the geology of the Sierra Nevada and the daily trail crew work of picking up and placing granite stones in tight cobble patterns on hard slab.
I love the reference to lost ponies with dragging saddles. You can drive across Nevada, my brother and I did that last May, and still see wild horses.
Well, what's dragging saddles? I mean,
They get lost. They just, they're with a pack and they get lost, and there's still a saddle hanging on to them.
So that, for me, it comes up with the image that somebody fell off that horse.
Or it just strayed off and the saddle came off. Who knows? But that's something you run into.
Yeah.
My father used to take horses back up in the backcountry in the summertime.
Well, I spent 3 weeks up in the very high Sierras up above Yosemite with a mule.
There you go.
And a horse.
Yeah.
And, I can see this, very much as a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you talked about this somewhat, the riprap. I mean, just from Wisconsin, I think of riprap as the stones laid out on a shoreline. I didn't know it had this meaning of, and this is Snyder saying, riprap is a cobble of stones laid on a steep, slick rock to make a trail for horses in mountains. I'd never heard of riprap in that sense.
Again, that was profound to me, again, as a metaphor for a poem, in a way. You're putting words in a path like that that's shining and beautiful. So it's a metaphor for a poem. Well, another, fascinating thing is he is making a metaphor for words as creek-washed stone, which is just beautiful. A stone you pick up out of a creek has been there for 1,000,000 years. It started as a rough chunk chipped off of something, and then the water through eons, through generations, has smoothed it up. And so it's just a simple stone, but it isn't a simple stone. It's been worked and worked and worked.
It's
by
a
time.
text. You can read the text.
Yeah.
You can read the
That's
history.
right. And so to use that as a metaphor for words in a poem is profound, I think.
Brilliant.
I love this one. I hadn't seen, this is I think the fourth line, before the body of the mind in space and time. I hadn't seen that reference. That's really the four dimensions, right? Space being the first three, and time. I hadn't seen that he'd already put that thought out there before he referenced the four-dimensional game of Go. But
Well, you look at something, you see 3 dimensions, but it doesn't take much to take you to the 4th dimension, which is to reflect on the change that has occurred over time. And it could be millions of years, and it could be one season in the Sierras, because there is erosion on the trails.
I love the line, just for its beauty, cobble of Milky Way.
Yeah.
Just like that path that you talked about, Lou.
And if you've ever spent dark nights in either the desert of California or the high mountains, and you laid in the sleeping bag and looked up and really seen the Milky Way, I have never seen it as clear and as beautiful as those 2 times, when there's clear atmosphere and a clear night, and the Milky Way is truly spectacular.
He was already so influenced by the Chinese poets who just wrote in these simple lines, and let the truth be revealed beneath those words. It's sort of a simplicity that is beguiling, because there's something else going on beneath the granite of the poem, or in the granite of the poem. There really is crystal and sediment linked hot.
But I also think that, and I think of this in terms of Japanese haiku, is that actually simplicity in many ways works to get you much closer to what really matters.
Can we just play this Gary Snyder reading?
I'm going to finish this little portion here and then turn this over to some of the other folks for a bit. This is called Riprap. It's the final poem in the Riprap sequence. Lay down these words before your mind like rocks, placed solid by hands in choice of place, set before the body of the mind in space and time. Solidity of bark, leaf, or wall. Riprap of things, cobble of Milky Way. Straying planets, these poems, people, lost ponies with dragging saddles, and rocky surefoot trails. The worlds like an endless, 4-dimensional game of Go. Ants and pebbles, in the thin loam each rock a word, a creek-washed stone, with torment of fire and weight, crystal and sediment linked hot, all change in thoughts as well as things.